Okay, this is Patterson speaking on the Birds in Flight sculpture at Huntington and Rookside.
And today is May 8th, 2010. At our board meeting in November of 2009, actually that was the general meeting of the Homes Association, the Birds in Flight sculpture was discussed, and it was decided by the majority of the respondents in the room. It was a simple majority vote of the neighborhood that the vote was to remove and restore or remove and dispose of the Birds in Flight sculpture. At that time, the neighborhood voted to remove the sculpture, and the majority ruled that that was the vote to remove the sculpture. Later, a committee was installed to discuss what to do with the removed sculpture, whether to, or their duty was A, to determine who was to remove it, and B, to determine where it was to be stored. That was the last bit of business that was accomplished with the Birds in Flight sculpture. Recently, it has come to my attention that the board has been discussing restoring the sculpture, because the committee that was installed to do the decision of removing the sculpture and where to store it chose an option that they were not told that they had an option to discuss, and they chose to restore the sculpture. Therefore, the work
Actually,
of that
that was
committee,
on the...
right. Therefore,
there was an option.
Well, actually, it was to remove the sculpture.
Yeah. And then decide what to do with it later.
To remove the sculpture, period.
Yeah.
And not restore the sculpture. That was the vote of the neighborhood.
It was to remove the sculpture and decide what to do with it later.
Decide where to store the sculpture. Decide disposition of the sculpture,
yes.
Not restoration. The board, or the committee that was to decide where to dispose and who to dispose of the sculpture, or in other words, to take it down, they chose to restore the sculpture. And so therefore the findings of that committee are moot and will have to be disposed of, because the committee's findings were not in accordance to the task that they were charged with.
Yeah, they came up with a different decision to, they then proposed that to the Homes Association board.
They failed at their duty of who to remove the sculpture and where to store the removed sculpture.
Yeah, the reason why they didn't store it, they want to store it, because it would cost $120 a month to store it. So that would use up the $7,500.
Then the decision should have been where to dispose of the sculpture.
That was one option.
Maybe, yeah. Also, right. It was still on the option of restoration.
Restoration was never an option. It was never discussed at that meeting.
I thought that what you're saying is true, but when I sent out that email, Tom Usher pointed out the minutes from that meeting. And in the minutes, they had written down restore as an option. I thought that it was remove and...
Yeah, I thought originally it was remove and dispose also, but I saw that also.
I thought it was remove and decide its disposition.
Which could be restoration. Yeah, could be anything.
But the vote of the neighborhood was removal and disposition. It was not removal and restoration. So the issue at hand was the neighborhood voted to remove and dispose of the sculpture. That was the vote of the neighborhood in the room that was present, which, notwithstanding what the committee says, the neighborhood voted against restoration of the sculpture. Now, we have the board currently wanting to write a check out of the general funds of the Warren
Out of the savings. We've been saving for this for years.
We have not been saving for this.
For upkeep is what we've been saving for.
For the entire neighborhood, not the sculpture. The sculpture was not part of that discussion. Now, it was not ever discussed until we brought it up at this meeting.
I agree, it has changed. They did propose disposition. They have a much wider interpretation of what disposition is.
Right, disposition should be getting rid of the sculpture, not restoring it.
They can also mean restoring.
But the neighborhood voted to not restore the sculpture, period. The minutes may say that the committee was installed to decide or to discuss. They were to make no decisions. They were only to discuss
And present it.
And present it to the board.
board.
And then the board voted in April. I wanted them to vote in May so I could get the survey out.
Right.
But they voted in May, and then 5 members voted for, and 3 voted against, and one abstention because my computer failed and I didn't vote.
However, that vote was out of line, period, because the precedent was set by the neighborhood vote in 2009 of November to dispose of the sculpture. The board voting to use general funds is out of line, is inappropriate, and is not the duty of the board to override the ruling of the neighborhood. So the board shall therefore be financially responsible personally for this sculpture because the neighborhood voted to remove the sculpture and dispose of it. The committee findings are irrelevant.
That is not
the
in
board shall be personally responsible.
That has nothing to...
Okay, how about we do this? So
The
your question
board can
is-
vote to repair stuff, and if it's a majority
but the
vote...
neighborhood voted to remove the sculpture, period.
We have to review
We'll
the
review
meeting,
the minutes,
yeah.
Because that's what I thought I remembered too, but in the meeting minutes, they reflected some. So we'll review the minutes from the neighborhood, the annual meeting, and maybe this is something that should go to an annual meeting.
Yeah, we need to make sure it's
and let
right.
the majority of the neighborhood
Yeah,
decide.
specific, because at that meeting...
That's why I polled the neighborhood to see how many for or against. We got slightly more for and slightly more against.
But then
So
the majority of people didn't even respond.
yeah, well, that's
And
typical
what
of
they
any
did before
survey.
At the annual
We
meeting
have to
also.
review
Yeah.
those minutes to determine who voted for it in November of 2009, who voted against it in 2009, and who voted to repair the sculpture in 2009. Because that is the actual tabulated vote on record that we have for this sculpture right now. These surveys are great, but that is the vote of the neighborhood currently withstanding.
And
Well,
the other thing is you may need to look at the bylaws.
Yeah, I brought the bylaws also. We'll review the bylaws and we'll look through
If the majority
everything.
of the neighborhood makes the decision, or...
It's the voting members of the board is what makes the final decision.
Are we
But
in
we'll-
an open discussion?
Yes.
Yeah,
Okay, okay.
this was on the minutes because he called me and
Yeah,
he
go
wanted to
ahead.
speak, and so it's...
Well, the issue I have, we have a committee that's working on behalf of the board to come up with a plan for public investment in the neighborhood, which includes that particular island. And, you know, we all hold different views, and that's good, but and I have a view that the sculpture was never an important sculpture. It's not of good quality, and it's so badly, in such bad condition, it rusted away.
It's rusting.
And it's not a restoration. That
It's
in
a
fact, the
reconstruction.
Nelsons said, they said, do not do this because it's not a restoration. They're going to put new steel rods and just tack on the copper pieces on the end of it.
So it will violate its
So,
original...
just so everybody's clear about what that is. If that's what the majority of people want to do, that's cool if we can determine that. But my concern has to do with procedure and how we do this, that we can't... I think we have to be very careful. We had a vote at an annual meeting. I think if we have a committee working on infrastructure that will include this, that we ought to have that be part of all of that, and then we decide how to fund it. We don't all fund one thing.
I think we should decide how to fund it before, but
The ash
it's...
borer is going to kill all our ash trees. I'd rather see the money spent on replacing trees. But that's just my personal opinion. We need to collectively make that decision. And I think we need to, there are people who feel passionately in favor of the sculpture, that I think we're losing an opportunity if we don't challenge them to help raise resources to match it. So I mean, that's what I think we can do as a neighborhood board, is challenge people, leverage the money we have in the bank to get a whole lot of stuff done, not just this, and not get mired in this about how many people are for or against it, but let's get lots of people for doing lots of things in the neighborhood,
Well,
and let's
there's-
leverage that, and not get mired
In the
in
survey, I asked how many people would be willing to donate to the neighborhood, and very few people have the money right now to donate. So
Well, I
it's just an
disagree with that
economic...
entirely. We've shown
In 2008, there would be a lot of people. The economy's gone down.
Of funds that people could donate.
Well,
They're
If people
choosing not
see
to.
us-
Yeah, they're
see
choosing
us
not to,
doing these
but-
things, people will donate. we have to demonstrate that we're moving forward and doing things.
Okay, we're at 9 minutes and 57 seconds here. It's
So I agree